In the valley of Elah, where the terebinth trees stood as silent, ancient witnesses, two great armies lay encamped, poised like predators upon opposing hills. On one side, the banners of the Philistines fluttered in the dry wind, a testament to their might and their brazen challenge. On the other, the men of Israel and Judah, the chosen people of the living God, were arrayed for battle under the command of King Saul. Yet no war cry echoed through the ravine. No arrows darkened the sky. A suffocating stillness held the land, for the war was not to be decided by the clash of thousands, but by the will of two. For between the armies, a champion had emerged from the Philistine camp, a man whose very presence was an act of war. His name was Goliath, from the city of Gath, and he was a giant not only in stature, but in the terror he inspired. He stood over 9 feet tall, a mountain of muscle and bronze. His helmet gleamed, a fearsome crest upon a fearsome head. He was clad in a coat of mail, its scales of bronze weighing more than a full-grown man, and greaves of the same metal protected his legs. Between his shoulders, a bronze javelin was slung, and in his hand he carried a spear whose staff was like a weaver's beam, its iron head a thing of dreadful weight. Before him walked a shield-bearer, himself a warrior of considerable size, yet dwarfed by the colossus he served. And as the sun rose each morning over the hills of Judah, this giant would stride into the valley, his voice a thunder that shook the very stones. "Why have you come out to draw up for battle?" he would roar, his words a cascade of contempt. "Am I not a Philistine, and are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves, and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." He would pause, letting the weight of his challenge settle like a shroud upon the Israelites. Then came the blasphemy, the true venom of his purpose. "I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Their hearts melted within them, and the courage of warriors turned to the trembling of frightened sheep. The challenge was not merely against their strength, but against their God, and in the face of such towering arrogance, their faith faltered. A nation was held hostage by the voice of one man. For 40 days, the shadow of Goliath fell upon the valley of Elah. For 40 days, the sun rose and set on a scene of perfect and agonizing stalemate. Twice each day, in the morning and in the evening, the giant presented himself, a relentless ritual of humiliation. His challenge, now horribly familiar, echoed from the Philistine hill, a constant reminder of Israel's fear and the perceived impotence of their king and their God. The soldiers of Israel would hear the booming voice, see the monstrous form stride forth, and a fresh wave of despair would wash over their ranks. They were warriors, yet they could not fight. They were a proud people, yet they were steeped in shame. King Saul, their tall and chosen leader, sat in his tent, a monarch imprisoned by dread, offering riches and his own daughter to any man who could slay the giant. But no man stepped forward. The reward was great, but the risk seemed absolute. The spirit of Israel was broken, its mighty army paralyzed. Meanwhile, far from the front lines of this spiritual crisis, in the quiet pastures surrounding Bethlehem, a young man went about his duties. He was David, the youngest of the 8 sons of Jesse. While his 3 eldest brothers, Eliab, Abinadab, and Shammah had followed Saul to the war, David remained behind. His world was not one of swords and shields, but of the shepherd's staff and the sling. His flock was his concern, the green hills his domain. He was a youth, ruddy and with beautiful eyes, and handsome in appearance, overlooked in the grand affairs of the kingdom. His life was a quiet rhythm of care and watchfulness, protecting the flock from the dangers of the wilderness. He knew the cry of the wolf and the shadow of the eagle. He did not know the fear that had gripped his people, for his heart was tuned to a different authority, to the quiet whisper of the Lord of hosts, who was his shepherd. But the threads of destiny are woven by a divine hand, and the path of the shepherd boy was about to lead him from the quiet fields of Bethlehem into the very heart of the valley of decision, where the fate of his nation hung precariously in the balance. A time was coming when the faith forged in solitude would be tested in the crucible of public defiance. The Lord was preparing his champion, not from the ranks of soldiers, but from the fields of service. The appointed day arrived, not with a trumpet blast, but with a father's simple request. Jesse, old and concerned for his sons at the front, called to David, "Take for your brothers an ephah of this parched grain and these 10 loaves, and carry them quickly to the camp to your brothers," he commanded. "Also take these 10 cheeses to the commander of their 1,000. See how your brothers are, and bring back news of them, and bring back some token from them." There was no sense of epic purpose in the command, only the practical love of a father for his sons. David rose early in the morning, his obedience swift and unquestioning. He left the sheep with a keeper, loaded the provisions, and set out on the journey to the valley of Elah, just as his father had commanded. He was a son on an errand, a delivery boy to the theater of war. He arrived at the outskirts of the camp as the army of Israel was moving into its battle formation for the day, raising the war cry. The sound was mighty, a display of martial intent, yet David would soon learn it was a hollow noise, a ritual of courage that masked a deep and abiding fear. He ran to the ranks and greeted his brothers, inquiring of their welfare. And as he was talking with them, a sudden hush fell over the Israelite line, a familiar, dreadful silence. Then it began. From the Philistine ranks, the champion emerged. Goliath of Gath strode forth, his shield-bearer before him, his bronze armor catching the morning light. David watched, his eyes wide, as this mountain of a man took his usual stand and shouted his usual words of defiance, the same words David's brothers and all of Israel had endured for 40 agonizing days. But for David, this was the first time. He heard the blasphemous challenge against the armies of the living God, and something ignited within his soul. It was not fear that he felt, but a holy indignation, a righteous anger that a mortal man should so brazenly defy the majesty of the Almighty. He saw the reaction of the soldiers around him. He saw these grown men, these warriors of Israel, flee from the giant's presence, their faces etched with terror. He was an outsider, a boy from the pastures, and yet he saw with clearer eyes than any man in that army. He saw not an unbeatable giant, but an offense against heaven. The fire that had been kindled in David's spirit now found its voice. He turned to the men standing near him, his words a stark contrast to the fear that choked the air. "What shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away this reproach from Israel?" he asked, his voice clear and strong. His question was not merely about the reward. It was about the restoration of honor. And then he spoke the heart of the matter, the question that burned within him. For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God? The phrase, "the living God," fell from his lips with a certainty that was utterly alien in that place of doubt. The soldiers, startled by the boy's audacity, repeated the king's promise riches, the king's daughter, an exemption from taxes for his father's house. But David's concern was not for earthly treasure. He asked the same question again and again, his words spreading through the ranks like a spark in dry tinder. A boy was speaking of honor and faith while warriors cowered. His eldest brother, Eliab, whose heart was filled with the same fear as the other soldiers, heard David's inquiries. But he did not see faith. He saw arrogance. His anger was kindled against his younger brother. "Why have you come down here?" Eliab demanded, his voice sharp with scorn. "And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your presumption and the evil of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle." It was the sting of familial rebuke, an accusation of youthful pride and dereliction of duty. Elah saw a glory-seeking child, not a vessel of divine purpose. He sought to shame David back into his place, to silence the voice that was challenging the comfortable misery of their fear. But David would not be silenced. He turned to Eliab, his response not one of anger, but of focused purpose. "What have I done now?" He asked, a simple, disarming question. Was it not but a word? He refused to be drawn into a petty squabble. His gaze was fixed on the giant in the valley and the God in the heavens. He turned away from his brother and continued his inquiries, his spirit undeterred. The courage of the shepherd boy had become a spectacle, and the words he spoke were too powerful to be ignored. The whispers that began with a few soldiers soon became a current, flowing through the anxious ranks of the army until they reached the ears of the king himself. The men reported to Saul what the boy David had been saying. They spoke of his strange fearlessness, of his talk of the living God, a phrase that must have struck the fearful king with both hope and shame. Intrigued, or perhaps desperate for any sliver of light in the oppressive darkness, Saul sent for him. And so David, the young shepherd from Bethlehem, was brought into the royal tent, into the presence of the most powerful man in Israel. He stood before King Saul, a monarch who, despite his towering physical stature, was stooped by the weight of his own terror. The air in the tent was thick with despair. Outside, the challenge of Goliath still hung in the air. Inside, a king had lost his nerve. David, however, showed no sign of intimidation. He looked upon his king and spoke with a boldness that could only come from a source beyond himself. "Let no man's heart fail because of him," David declared, his voice ringing with conviction. The hymn needed no clarification. The entire world of Israel had been reduced to the singular threat of Goliath. Then came the astonishing proclamation, a statement of intent so audacious it bordered on madness. "Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine." Saul looked at the youth before him, ruddy, handsome, a boy on the cusp of manhood, smelling of the fields, not the battlefield. He saw no warrior, no champion. He saw only a lamb being offered to a lion. The king's reply was a sigh of weary realism, the voice of bitter experience. "You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him," Saul said, his tone a mixture of pity and dismissal. "For you are but a youth, and he has been a man of war from his youth." It was the logic of the world. It was the assessment of every man in the army. Strength against strength, experience against experience. By any earthly measure, the contest was a foregone conclusion. Saul saw the insurmountable odds, the physical reality of the boy versus the giant. He could not see the invisible ally that stood with David, the unseen force that rendered all worldly calculations meaningless. The king's doubt was the final, greatest test before the battle itself. If David could overcome the fear of his own king, he could face the fury of the Philistine. David listened to the king's reasoned doubt, and he did not argue with its logic. He did not boast of some hidden strength or secret skill in fighting. Instead, he offered a testimony. He shifted the focus from himself to the God he served, recounting his history not as a warrior, but as a faithful shepherd. "Your servant used to keep sheep for his father," David began, his voice steady and calm. "And when there came a lion or a bear and took a lamb from the flock, I went after him and struck him and delivered it out of his mouth. And if he arose against me, I caught him by his beard and struck him and killed him." He spoke of these life and death struggles as simple matters of fact, the fulfillment of his duty to protect what was entrusted to him. He was establishing his credentials, but they were not credentials of military prowess. They were credentials of divine deliverance. This lion and this bear were his training ground, a private theater where God had shown his power through his humble servant. "Your servant has struck down both lions and bears," David continued, his voice rising with conviction as he made the crucial connection. "And this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them. for he has defied the armies of the living God." He equated the giant not with a king or a warrior, but with a predatory beast that had trespassed on holy ground. Then came the ultimate declaration of faith, the source of all his courage. "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." A profound shift occurred in the royal tent. The fearful logic of Saul was being dismantled by the unshakable faith of a boy. David's confidence was not in himself, but in the proven record of God's faithfulness. Saul looked at David, and for the first time, perhaps he saw not just a youth, but a flicker of the divine fire he himself had lost. His own despair could not stand against such certainty. "Go," the king relented, his voice filled with a newfound awe, "and the Lord be with you." In a final, well-intentioned gesture, Saul clothed David in his own royal armor. He placed a bronze helmet on his head and dressed him in a coat of mail. But it was a foreign weight. David tried to walk, but he could not. "I cannot go with these," he said to Saul, "for I have not tested them." He was not a soldier. He would not fight with a soldier's tools. He took them off, rejecting the king's protection to rely solely on God's. He took up his shepherd's staff, went to the nearby brook, and chose 5 smooth stones, placing them in the shepherd's pouch at his side. With his sling in his hand, he walked out of the camp and down into the valley to meet the Philistine. The Philistine army watched as a lone figure descended the Israelite hill. They expected a champion, a warrior clad in bronze and iron, a man of renown and might. Instead, they saw a boy. David walked with a steady pace, his staff in his hand, the sun on his ruddy face. He was not marching to war. He was walking as a shepherd walks, with purpose and without fear. Goliath, flanked by his shield-bearer, began his arrogant stride forward to meet this challenger. As David drew nearer, the giant's expression of curiosity curdled into one of utter contempt. He saw no threat, no honor in this encounter. He saw an insult. "Am I a dog?" Goliath bellowed, his voice dripping with disdain, "that you come to me with sticks?" His eyes scanned the boy, noting his youth and handsome features, so out of place in this arena of brutal conflict. The giant's pride was wounded. The Israelites had not sent a warrior. They had sent a child, a mockery. He cursed David by his Philistine gods, invoking the powers of darkness against the boy. And then he made his terrible promise. "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and to the beasts of the field." It was the ultimate threat, a promise of total annihilation, of an unburied and dishonored end. The air grew heavy with the weight of the curse. The Philistine army murmured in agreement, confident in their champion's power. The Israelite army watched in horrified silence, their last hope embodied in a boy with a stick. But David did not flinch. He did not tremble. He stood his ground, and from the valley floor, his voice rose to meet the giant's roar, not with equal volume, but with an authority that was infinitely greater. "You come to me with a sword, and with a spear, and with a javelin," David called out, his words a precise and powerful indictment. "But I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." He stripped the battle of its physical dimensions and laid bare its spiritual core. This was not man against man. It was pagan pride against the living God. "This day," David continued, his voice now a prophetic torrent, "the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And I will give the dead bodies of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear. For the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand." The gauntlet had been thrown. The terms of engagement were set. Faith had answered defiance. The time for words was over. Spurred to rage by David's bold proclamation, Goliath of Gath began to move, his heavy tread shaking the ground as he advanced upon the boy. The final terrible moments were at hand. But as the giant lumbered forward, a startling thing happened. David did not retreat. He did not hesitate. He ran. He ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine, closing the distance with the speed and agility of a shepherd accustomed to chasing predators. His movement was one of eager faith, not of fearful defense. While running, his hand darted into his shepherd's bag. His fingers closed around one of the 5 smooth stones he had chosen from the brook. In a single fluid motion, he placed the stone into his sling. He began to whirl it, the leather thongs cutting through the air, faster and faster. A rising hum that was the only sound in the suddenly silent valley. Goliath raised his massive head, his helmeted brow furrowed in anger, his exposed forehead a small, vulnerable target in a fortress of bronze. David released the stone. It flew from the sling, a silent, swift messenger of divine judgment. It cut a true and straight path across the valley, guided by a hand greater than David's. The stone sank deep into the Philistine's forehead. The giant's eyes went blank. His immense body swayed for a moment, a mighty tower cut from its foundations. Then he crashed forward, falling face down upon the earth with a thunderous impact that echoed from the hills. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but stunned silence. The champion of the Philistines, the terror of Israel, lay motionless in the dust. Then David ran and stood over the fallen giant. Since he had no sword of his own, he drew Goliath's great sword from its sheath. The very weapon that had been a symbol of the giant's power now became the instrument of his final defeat. With all his might, David brought the heavy blade down and cut off Goliath's head. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, their arrogance vaporized into pure terror. A collective cry of panic erupted from their ranks, and they turned and fled. At that moment, the spell of fear over Israel was shattered. A great roar rose from the men of Israel and Judah. They surged from their positions, pouring down into the valley, a mighty, vengeful tide. They pursued the Philistines with a renewed and ferocious courage, chasing them to the gates of Gath and Ekron, and the road to Shaaraim was littered with their fallen. The victory was absolute. Israel was saved. The echo of that single stone has resounded through millennia. The story of the shepherd boy and the giant is etched into the memory of the world, a timeless testament to a profound and unshakable truth. It is the story of a reversal of fortune on the grandest scale. The strong was laid low by the weak. The proud was humbled by the meek. The one who was armed to the teeth with the weapons of this world was defeated by a boy armed only with a shepherd's sling and a courageous faith. The moral of this epic confrontation is clear and powerful. It declares that the battles that matter most are not decided by human strength, by the size of our armies, or the keenness of our swords. They are decided in the unseen realm of the Spirit. David's victory was not his own. He was an instrument, a vessel prepared by God in the lonely pastures, his character forged in quiet faithfulness. When he faced the giant, he did not see an insurmountable obstacle. He saw an opportunity for God to be glorified. He knew that the battle was the Lord's. And so, the shepherd who was scorned by his brother and doubted by his king became the hero of his nation, a symbol of hope and a forerunner of the greatest king to come. The story teaches that God does not see as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, on the height and the armor and the fearsome reputation. But the Lord looks on the heart. He chose a shepherd boy with a pure heart and a steadfast faith to silence the blasphemy of a giant and to deliver a nation from fear. The true giant in the valley that day was not Goliath. It was the crippling fear that had paralyzed an entire army. And it was overcome not by a greater physical force, but by a faith that dared to believe that with God, all things are possible. The pride of man is a fragile fortress, but the faith of a servant is a mighty weapon. This is the lesson from the valley of Elah. The story you have just heard is more than an ancient tale of courage. It is more than a historical account of a spectacular battle. It is a mirror for the giants we all face in our own lives. We all have our own valleys of Elah, those moments when we stand before an obstacle that seems too great, too powerful, too intimidating to overcome. These giants may not carry a spear or wear bronze armor. Their names are fear, doubt, anxiety, addiction, despair. They stand before us day after day, taunting us, challenging our faith, and seeking to paralyze us in our tracks. The world, like King Saul, will often tell you that you are not equipped. It will tell you that you are too young, too old, too weak, too inexperienced. It will try to weigh you down with its own armor, its own conventional solutions that do not fit your spirit. But the lesson of David is a timeless and living truth. Your victory does not lie in adopting the world's weapons. It lies in remembering the faithfulness of God in your own past, in the lions and bears you have already overcome. It lies in choosing the simple, smooth stones of faith, prayer, and trust. It lies in stepping out into the valley, not in your own name, but in the name of a power greater than yourself. What giants are you facing today? What voices of defiance seek to steal your peace and your purpose? Remember the shepherd boy, his simple stone, and his unshakable faith. The same God who delivered David from the paw of the lion and the hand of the Philistine is with you now. Find the courage to pick up your stone. To explore more stories of incredible faith and to discover the strength that lies within these eternal narratives, we invite you to connect with a community that cherishes these truths. Your greatest victory is waiting.